Hey there, folks. Welcome back to the swu.report podcast. I'm Kenan, and today we're going to do something a little different. But before I do want to rep the old White Book podcast jersey I busted out, and the current Wu-Tang Clan hat. So, there we go. Always fun to rep some gaming roots here. So, over the past several months, you guys probably have seen that I've been posting these articles to the swu.report website, and they are meta breakdowns of the Lawless Time, or Law for short, PQ, or Planetary Qualifier season. So we've had many weeks of data here. We've had many planetary qualifiers, sector, regional, all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to do this episode as a recap because I know the written content is not necessarily for everyone, and video and audio may have some different users as well. So we're going to dive in with a quick recap of how that has gone. And bear with me, I actually wrote a script for this episode. I don't normally really do that, but I think this episode in particular, it would really behoove me to keep straight what I'm talking about in the correct order. So before we get into that recap, though, I do want to talk about something that we are debuting on the website the same day as this podcast. That is going to be a new APR Dashboard. What does that mean? Well, it means you've probably seen these nice charts that I've been including in my articles to try to give a graphical breakdown of those APR trends for decks as they've changed over the course of a season, some of the stage gaps in stage 1 and stage 2 performance, that type of thing. But these are static images, I admit. And some folks have pointed out to me that that's, while interesting, maybe not exactly the most effective method to show these for other creators, particularly video content creators that want something a little more engaging to the eye. So we've built something new and interactive, a lot more going on with it. We'll let you dig around with things yourself. So it's called the APR Dashboard, and it's going to show up in the top bar menu here as meta once I actually publish this. So that's going to drop you, once you click on it, over here onto this sweet landing page. So I'm going to walk through it here in pieces as we recap the meta. So if you're doing dishes, you're driving, you're listening to the audio show, no worries. I think the recap will still be beneficial. But if you are around and you've got eyes on this video, you can see what's going on, or you can poke around on the website yourself. I think that will be even more interesting than me just reading off numbers. But before we even get that far, I know, it's another parenthetical aside. I thought it might be worthwhile to mention a little bit about my history and how we got here. What I mean by that is I actually have a long history in competitive card gaming of trying to gather stats. Way back in, I think about 2012 or so, though, as I said, records back then are a little fuzzy. I started a project, my own spreadsheet. I mean, an Excel document on my laptop, not even, shared Google Sheet, where I was trying to track tournament wins, tournament results. Back in those days, we didn't have something like a Melee website to pull things from. It really boiled down to me trying to find emails of stores that were running regionals, or to bug players I knew that were in that area, that type of thing, to say, hey, who won your event? What was the top 8? What house were they playing? What restricted card were they running? Things like that. And, it did what I needed it to do. It gave us content to talk about on 2C1C, the Two Champs and a Chump podcast. We could at least break down a little bit of info, things like, hey, Lannister won, 5 events. Martell won 3 here in the States, but Martell couldn't win any in Europe, things like that. It was very basic. Not only my knowledge and sophistication in what is an interesting metric to track, and my ability to calculate it, but also the ability to even get the data to do it. So after a little bit of time, another gentleman, Alex Hines, kind of took things over, and he started a website. It started as a Google sheet. It eventually became a website. You can read the history in the About page here. There were a couple of other gentlemen, Michael and let's see here, Alex, I think. It's taking a little longer to load the page than I thought. No, Jason, Michael and Jason, who were involved in things, helping with the programming, the graphic design, that type of thing. But he started a website that was a similar dashboard to track those results for Game of Thrones. You can see here, the website is now down. I had to pull it up on the way back machine. And because of that, it does not have access to the actual data from the database that it was recording. They would break things down by agenda, by house, by qualification ratios, that type of thing. It was more advanced than what I was doing, and frankly, the graphic design still looks great, but is still not quite all the way there to what we've got currently. So I don't know. Take it for what you will. Those guys, jumping up to the next level there means either I, created a problem someone else had to solve, or maybe it was a sign something was worthwhile. I don't know. Maybe it's both. Point is, I've been tinkering with that sort of thing for a long time, which brings us to Star Wars Unlimited, and how we kind of got into this to start with here, because it's a community that when I started paying attention around the Galactics of last year, I was talking about conversion rate as kind of a primary analytical tool, along with maybe total win numbers, which I think is a valid and useful metric. And conversion rate maybe has its place, but I think it's a flawed metric. And, I wrote a whole article about that type of thing, which you can find on the website. It's titled, "We're Talking About It Wrong." And yes, that does strike me as a little bit funny coming from this, championship level player, right? But the point is, conversion rate just measures what percentage of pilots of a deck go from one stage of a tournament to the next stage, right? It has some uses, but it ignores the field representation. So what that means is you can get really crazy results. For instance, if there is only one player playing a particular deck, and that player then goes on to win that event, or even just to make the cut in that event, it looks like that deck has a 100% conversion rate, which frankly, I think based on sample size of one deck, I think we all know that kind of skews perception. Even a deck that has, let's say, 2 players, where those players say are both have to face each other in a win and in round before the cut. And one player wins and is in, one is not. You have a 50% conversion ratio, rate, which is still a little different, a little misleading, I think. And honestly, I think conversion rate tends to run into issues at the very top end as well. Once you have a large enough concentration of a particular deck archetype, when you run multiple rounds of Swiss, if it is a reasonably strong archetype, it becomes more and more common for those decks which are winning to then face each other and to weed each other out, to have that win and in scenario that I mentioned with only 2 players, right? So conversion rate, I think, is most effective for decks that are in kind of the middle ground. They are not the least popular, nor are they the most popular decks in a field. So that brings us to what I feel is a superior metric and one I've been pushing for some time now, obviously in these articles and occasionally in comments on Reddit or on another video or something. So basically what that is performance rate is the first part. So APR stands for adjusted performance rate. So let's talk first about performance rate. So that is the percentage change in a deck's field representation from one stage to the next, right? So field to top 8 or top 8 to win. Now, for the quickest, shortest example of this sort of thing that I could cook up, that I threw in a Reddit comment a while back, is basically this. If you have a deck that makes up 25% of a field, right? It's 25 decks out of 100 decks at a tournament. Then you would expect, if everything's truly perfectly balanced in the card game, right? Then you would expect when you cut to top 8 that it would also make up 25% of that top 8. It would be 2 decks. You would expect everything to stay completely even. And in that same note, once you move on to wins, you would expect it to win 1 out of every 4 events. However, if you have a deck that is 25% of the field, but becomes 75% of the cut, now it's dramatically overperforming what is expected. That is its performance rate. It's eating up share of the field that belonged to other decks, right? And the same thing sort of happens in reverse. Not sort of, it does happen in reverse. If it makes up 25% of the field, but only 10% of a cut, it has bled share to some other decks that are outperforming it. So those wind up looking very different when you're considering performance rate or adjusted performance rate versus raw conversion rate. So performance rate, however, is not perfect. It also can run into some issues when you have a deck that has very small representation in the event, right? So a deck with only 3 pilots that goes, 2 for 2 should not get the same analytical weight here as a deck with 103 pilots that goes, 82 for 103. So what we do then is we make a logarithmic adjustment for the field size, or field representation rather, which scales that result so that it works better at small sample sizes and can still let them be meaningful data points if, maybe a little less confidently. So in that case, you wind up with 2 stages, 2 numbers, 3 by the time we're done with things, and I'll explain that. So you wind up with rates that are going to be a field to T8. That is going to be how it does in the field until you become the cut. Then you're going to wind up with T8 to win. That's going to be from the top 8 and then the shares of wins, or combined, which admittedly is a trickier metric. This is truly just a flat addition between the two, right? So if you've got, say, a negative field to top 8, but a very positive top 8 to win, right? So you tend to get weeded out, but if you do make the top 8, you have a very good chance to win it. You could still wind up with a positive combined APR, and similar things in other directions. So combined is a little trickier. Your percentages can get a little wackier there. So anyway, here that lets us take a quick look at things. Now, if you are flipping through these on the dashboard and you are cross-referencing those to the articles, I do have to give a bit of a caveat here. And this is particularly why I needed to write a script to keep myself on track for this episode, because the articles, as we see over here, these are using SWU Competitive Hub. That's where I started in the first couple of weeks, and I realized I kind of needed more data, particularly on the field as a whole. And I started pulling some in from SWU stats, and that then ran into some issues as I was trying to reconcile between the two. It's not quite exact. The two are tracking slightly different pools. There are somewhat more events and a little bit further time. I believe maybe stats went back to pre-release weekend. So SWU Competitive Hub has narrowed that data field some by cutting out some smaller events. So if you are looking at the dashboard, it is actually going to be based just on the SWU Metastats website, because it has an API that I can pull, I've discovered, so I can start automating some of this. I'm still pulling it into a spreadsheet and cross-checking from there, but then that is getting dumped here into the dashboard. So these numbers will not match exactly, but I think the overall trends stay pretty similar for almost everything. I think it's still useful for you to take a look at. Honestly, this is probably a little bit better, probably a little more definitive. So we'll see. However, because of that, there is something that I feel that I need to really clarify here. And that culprit here is Grand Admiral Thrawn with a yellow force base, who you might have noticed barely shows up in any of the articles. There's barely a footnote through Hub Stats. 2 wins across the season. However, the dashboard here, as you'll see, winds up reporting him at 6 wins and gives him remarkable stats. That is, as I said, due to that slightly different event pool. So I don't think the weakness here is the APR methodology. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to based on the data it's given. But what that does show is the data that you're ingesting, the criteria you use for that, can meaningfully alter some of the picture of the format, dramatically so when we're talking about low volume archetypes. So the methodology is sound, data matters. So anyway, as we take a look at some of the rest of these, so we've got our dashboard here with all events. You can filter these to take a look at a variety of different sections: field to top 8, top 8 to win or combined, and follow the trend line for the top 20 archetypes by play volume, so total amount of them throughout the season. You can slice those various ways by the deck tiers, which are the kind of usual S, A, B, C, D. And you'll notice those do not strictly match what the community has kind of recognized in popular thought as we've gone, because these are based on the combined APR numbers. Now, some of those, like Lando Lake Country, are definitely expected. Thrawn, as we talked about, is a little different. Piet maybe has not been in those lofty circles. The B range winds up with some other decks like Boba Fett Lake Country, and you are able to turn these on and off if you feel so led. If I want to drop Yularen out of that view, I can do that type of thing or pull it back. Those also live update down in the current rankings, and you can read our breakdown at the moment for how those are scored for the various tiers. So anything with a combined APR of 80% or better is S tier, 40% or better is going to be A, 10% or better is a B, negative 10 or better is a C, and below negative 10 is a D. So again, that's combined. That can take into account several factors there in a deck that, say, performs very strongly in one or section or the other. So let's recap a little bit about some of this particular meta season. So from week 3 onward, we hit the deck that, I have, there we go. Because I've turned things on and off, things have gotten a little different. Let's do it this way and show the spotlight. You can click any of the decks to get a spotlight panel on them to look at just that deck by itself and get a view for its arc. So kind of the big folks here for the entire season are going to be, let's see, let's grab Boba Fett, field to top 8, all. There we go. Where do we have Boba Fett? Lake Country. Let's pull up his spotlight so you can see his arc throughout the season as he spiked pretty heavily in week 3, his best performance, and he started to kind of pull downward and flatten out for the rest of that season, though he still ends positively. As you would see in the articles, if you're checking back with those, he starts out, let's see, at ends at 10.3% of the total field, all on its own here. So that's the real winner as far as a meta concentration perspective. But as I said, you'll see it start to dip downward here as its performance weakened as time went on, and that closing edge began to erode. So it became pretty clear that Boba was kind of the known quantity deck of the season. It's powerful, but it's not exactly subtle. It does kind of what it does, wanting to pile damage on, and opponents clearly targeted it as one of the key decks to prepare for. And that preparation, I think, really mitigated Boba's performance as the season went on. On the other hand, we've got Lando Lake Country, which we can take a look at here, which is arguably the season's most interesting story, right? So you can see when it debuted, of course, in Atlanta, it did not register at all before then. It was a brand new surprise archetype. And then it climbs pretty steadily for the rest of the season. It arrived and then proceeded to do particularly well, capping out, depending on which metrics here you're counting by, topping out here around week 7 or 8 with a very high combined APR, about 133 in the dashboard here. And it winds up tracking the second highest in wins, I believe, and with 17, and ends, going back to article numbers, since that's what I have typed in my notes here, winds up with a field to top 8 APR of plus 77.1%. So about 77% overperforming. That's huge. That's the best entry conversion number in the whole tracked field that we have here by a significant margin. And it's fine. Once it's finding its way into those top 8s, it's still closing at a particularly high, or at least a notable rate. Its top 8 to win was running at about 11.9, 12%. So that's efficient, but maybe not nearly as wildly efficient. It does seem, particularly as the season went on, that other players tending to make those top cuts were prepared for the new play pattern evidenced by Lando Lake Country. On the other hand, we wind up with Obi-Wan Blue Force. So let's pop up here. Let's find Obi-Wan in our list. Blue Force, you can see, not looking great. His C tier here. The deck that arguably should win more than it does. Looks like we have a bit of a data jump here as well. Early in the season, everyone was pretty hard on Obi-Wan Virgin's Temple. And kind of in a similar time frame to Lando Lake Country debuting, I think the community at large kind of settled on the generic force bases performing much better. So that's why you see this jump into the metrics later here than you might expect looking at the week markers. So it kind of just underperformed the whole time, though. It was one of the most populous decks throughout the whole time. It's 643 entries. We can take a look at our field share distribution donuts down here. Let's see. Yeah, it was 7.3. So it's the second most represented deck behind Boba Fett Lake Country, which, by the way, those do the same thing. Clicking on any of the donut segments will take you to the spotlight for that particular deck. So yeah, it winds up with a field to top 8 APR, running positive, but barely so, and a top 8 to win solidly in the negative, if not distressingly so, in the dashboard here, showing at about negative 8.9%. So it was about as less likely to win by the end of week 12 here by the dashboard as Lando was to win. So I think, out of this length of time that we had to measure here, there's some real structural issues that seem to show in Obi-Wan. I think the most likely culprit is the lack of space presence when some of the other decks, particularly 2 of the highest performing and 2 of the other top appearance decks, right? Boba Fett at the highest, Lando in 3rd place, even in 4th place, Luke, Data Vault, all of those other of the top 4 highest field share decks are all very heavy in space. And that turns out to be a real problem for the extremely ground-focused Obi-Wan decks. So let's talk then about some of the other items that we've got on the dashboard. You'll notice the Meta Movers widget here in the right sidebar. That's going to change each week to show which deck archetypes have the biggest week-over-week field share change at any point in time, that point being that week. So you'll see those that are currently rising, those that are currently falling. That should give you some perspective on where the momentum is in the meta at any given moment. So the ones I'd be watching here on that widget are definitely going to be the rising. But if you maybe are feeling a little played out on some of the falling decks, maybe it's worth skipping them. So what else do we have to take a look at to recap for the week? Now, I may not hunt all of these down to click and spotlight them all for you at this point, but some other interesting data points that we've got. I did talk about Luke Data Vault, the other kind of disappointment of the season. You can see he started off very, very strong early in the season, and even by the end was one of the most represented decks in the field. But you can see his performance just completely tanks and flatlines, essentially. There's a slight rise toward the end of the season. Some of that, I think, is baked in to the SWU metastats having a wider field. I definitely recall some comments about my hub data I was pulling from the hub not showing any Luke win at one point. So that is the other letdown of the field, that structurally he just could not keep up with what the other decks were doing, which is kind of fascinating. But he was, pretty strongly in kind of that aggro end of the field, I think, while the decks that really started picking up and performing, I think, leaned heavier into mid-range archetypes than Luke himself did. We also wind up with a few others that told some interesting stories as we went. Again, I'm not necessarily pulling the spotlights on all of these, but Piet Red had an interesting run here. Per my article data, 15 top eights, 5 wins, ended on a top 8 to win APR of positive 67.2%. So that's a pretty extreme closing efficiency, which is, pretty interesting. I think Piet was not one that folks had mostly jumped on as one of the top tier decks in the field, and some of that might have to do with people's consideration getting muddied with Piet Blue, which also had a reasonable number of entries, about 169 in hub data or my articles anyway, but was posting a pretty dismal negative 39% top 8 to win. So that's one of the starkest base pairing differences that can really shift some of these archetypes and where that actually winds up going. In fact, there's another tool here on the site that I think is interesting here at the top. We can actually pull up, how about Piet Blue and Piet Red, and then compare, and we've got another great interface. I think this is the one I'm most excited about, that I think competitive players are going to love, is the head-to-head comparison, where we are able to, again, this is not my data, this is all being pulled in from SWU metastats, so thank you so much for that work over there. We are just giving players another way to view some of the matchup performance stuff. You can tell in head-to-head, this is funny. The colors here are flipped. Red base is shown in blue, but you can see it's got about a 54.5% chance to win in head-to-head. And then you can do things like view their combined APRs against each other. You can take a look to see who's actually winning head-to-head in any of these particular metrics in the individual field to top 8 to win, just hard win rates, that sort of thing. You'll see them highlighted. If it is a negative number, it will always be in red. If it's positive, it will always be in green. But between the two deck archetypes that you're comparing, we'll highlight them with this box here in the same color to match as they're listed at the top here. So kind of a fun way to break things down if you are really trying to decide between two decks, or you really want to get into some nitty gritty about what you feel you are most likely to face, particularly, let's say, in a top 8, when you know decks are paring down into a smaller number of appearances, that type of thing. So what else do we have to mention for the season? Darth Maul Blue Force also was an interesting one. Wound up with 16 top 8s, 4 wins, a plus 42.1 top 8 to win. So seems that it finds it a bit tough to get through the field to those elimination rounds, but it converts very well once it actually does that. Similarly to Sabe, which I mentioned kind of in passing, I think, it suggests that the skilled pilots here that really know their matchups are able to really take advantage of that deck when they get to the top end of the events. So what else have we got here? We've also got another chart called stage analysis. Make sure I am looking at the correct one. Here we go. Stage analysis. So that is, oh, nope, sorry. I've reused a name here. Yeah. Stage gap. I mistyped. Yeah. I've mistyped here in my notes. This should be talking about the stage gap chart here. This gives you a bit of a comparison so you can see how decks are doing in that field to top 8 to win sort of range. You can see that differential versus each other for any particular deck line, right? So Grand Admiral Thrawn, which was our big outlier in this data, as I mentioned, was really quite negative, almost the most negative chance to make it from the field to the top 8, only beaten out, it looks like, by Obi-Wan Virgin's Temple. But then in the few scenarios that it did, it has a kind of astronomical odds to actually win that event. Okay, we're going to keep going. Looks like I need some more RAM on this computer. I don't know what's going on, why it keeps telling me I only have 1 gigabyte available, but there it is. That's why there's a bit of a break here. So we're going to keep running and see what happens. So we've got the stage gap chart. I mentioned in passing stage analysis. This is a scatter plot here where you're going to scale the top 8 to win on the left, field to top 8 on the right. So that gives you a different perspective on how far a deck goes each particular direction. And we do have an explainer here basically about decks being far to the left. Again, Thrawn here, very, very bad chances here to actually make it from the field to top 8, but extremely high chances for top 8 to win. On the other hand, you run out a far outlier here as well with Lando, which is data that I do feel very confident in at this point, right? That one has somewhat reasonably positive, fairly positive odds here to win and very high chances to make it from the field to the top 8. So that breaks that slice down a little bit of a different direction for you. So what else do we have in the dashboard that is worth taking a look at? We also have the Meta Diversity Index, HHI. So that stands for the Herfindahl-Hirschman Index. And bear with me, this is getting kind of experimental. It's an attempt here to apply a measure of market concentration that we're borrowing from economics to track meta health. we had to make some adjustments to the system and the scale and our cutoff points. We tried to go ahead and list some notes here in this section so you can get an idea. But in short, the lower the number is, the wider the field is, the more open it is. The higher that number, the more concentrated that field is. So that is maybe how we'll be able to keep an eye on whether the meta gets into a dangerous spot. Bear with me. This one in particular, I think, is the most likely to get overhauled, or maybe we decide it just doesn't work in this context and drop it entirely. But we'll see how it runs. You can see the meta here maybe was fairly concentrated early on, and this cuts off for early weeks when we have very few entries to go off of. But it kind of flatlines as we go here. And again, the lower it goes, the more open the meta is. So it feels like things were in a pretty good spot. So in that case, we end the season at about a 3.2. And in the current calibration anyway, 0 to 10 would be a very open meta. 10 to 20 is healthy. 20 to 35 starts getting concentrated, and that sort of thing. Anything above 35 would be very oppressive. So we'll take a look. We may need to massage those as we go. All right, what else have we got? Probably I'd be doing a disservice if we did not mention Prague at all as we went. That was the regional, kind of the capstone for the law competitive season. And mea culpa, I predicted that Dedra was going to win it all. Dedra Colossus, let's grab her spotlight, right? She had a spike here in week 6, and she kind of had this wave form, right, as she starts to oscillate back and forth. And you can see she was starting to ride a real momentum trend moving upward here. Again, this is the dashboard data since I'm looking at it at the moment. Weeks 8, 9, 10, she starts really seeing this ramp upward. And that's about the time that I made the call that I thought she was going to take Prague. She did not win, unfortunately. So Akbar Data Vault won. Go figure. So it had exactly one field entry in the whole data set there, that being Prague, right? And this runs into the exact thing we were talking about with small sample sizes, right? This conversion rate looks just completely astronomical for that event. But when you convert that to an APR, it does at least moderate somewhat to a 71.7 top 8 to win. So you can tell that is still a high number, right? But that is kind of in relation, at least makes it comparable to discuss to something like Lando sitting in what did we say, 20 or something like that. If I scrolled back up here to double check it, we could. Top 8 to win ends, about 20. So that kind of gives us an expected result, that it has mitigated some of that oddity to what was going on. So Prague had a lot of interesting things that also went down in it. Boba Fett had 113 players in day one, right? 16.5% of the field, even bigger than he has been for his general season-wide field share. Lando at 76 players, 11% of the field, and neither of them made the top 8 at all. Obi-Wan Blue Force, 56 players, 8% of the field, no top 8 appearance as well, right? So the 3 most dominant archetypes of the Law season completely shut out of the top 8 of the season's biggest event. So that really tells you something. Every single top 8 finisher running a deck that had kind of been living outside of the tier 1 or tier S, tier, A, however you want to measure those tiers, regardless, out of that tier 1 conversation all season. So that full spread of off-meta builds here, they clearly came in with a lot of practice on their specific builds, as the Akbar player was noted. But they also came in, I think, clearly with a lot of preparation against those decks that have been the biggest chunk of the meta throughout, because those were even bigger chunks of the meta at Prague. And I think to navigate that, they really had to prep for those particular matchups. We also did have something else, Kazuta Data Vault, 2 players making that top 8. It had not been a huge force in things as we went, but did jump out here to become a much bigger piece right at the end, piece of the conversation right at the end of the season. You can keep an eye on that type of thing in the Meta Movers widget. So, yeah. What else have we got here? We've also got our population versus performance chart to kind of cap off our seasonal chat. This one is also one of my favorites. It is much like the other scatter we had. It's going to give us an APR run down one side. This is combined APR versus meta share on I need more food at this point along the lower axis. So you can see the further it shifts to the right, like Boba Fett, it has been a much larger percentage of the field at large. And the higher it shifts up in the chart, the better it has performed, the better combined APR it has overall. But we've also combined this with another indicator that the larger the dot is, that actually shows event wins. So you're able to take a look at one of these, say, Colonel Yularen Red Base, or maybe Darth Vader JTL. That's my boy. That's the one I took on a pretty solid run to the top 8 of our local PQ here. You can get a feel for how popular it is, so meta share, how it's doing in general, how it's doing on a win, that type of thing. This can really, if you give a slice right through here, I think that gives you a very good peek into what are the true top decks of the field, and then within them, who is the top dog out of that section. I think this is really a useful tool. And again, just like everything else, you can click on that, and then we can go pull the spotlight page for Vader himself. See his dip here as Luke was really still pushing hard, I think. And people got pretty scared out of Vader. He was doing poorly. Boba was doing well. Vader also, I think, took a little while to figure out that matchup. And then he really spikes as well. He mitigates some as the season goes. But I think, that still shows him as a very reasonable option. So, what do we take away from the meta and our tools here? So first thing I think is that the format's top archetypes were very powerful, but not unbeatable. I think, especially as Prague shows, they could be beaten by players that understood the matchups, that understood their decks, that knew how to exploit their weaknesses and account for their own. And Prague proved that, I think, at scale, right? Largest event. And not only was it just that the winner clearly had done that, but that the entire top 8 proved that they had done that as well, I think. A second point that I think this data really shows us over the course of the season is that base selection matters a lot. Most of our top performers here have a base with health above the 30 HP mark. Late Country at 34 was the most populous. Data Vault comes up close. Even Dedra that I was betting on was running Colossus for 35. This extra HP is really, I think, shaping the closing profile of these decks, particularly in a match on match basis, not just APR wide for this whole curve, but on a match by match basis where any deck they run up against has to overcome a closing stage, probably, or at least often, a full turn later than they would against a base 30 health deck, maybe 2 turns later than they would against a splash or a force base. So that is a really stark standout that, I think I still want to watch. I don't love base crowding, which is something I've written about in some of these articles, where the efficiency of some of these bases and their performance is crowding out the appearances of some others and some kind of more creative deck archetypes that could take advantage of that. And if you're thinking about Data Vault and you are considering Luke, let's just keep in mind Data Vault here. Let's grab Oh, I may have an error here trying to pull a Luke Data Vault. There we go. And let's grab about any other Data Vault here. Let's grab Aura Data Vault and compare. So the drop here, Data Vault, if you are thinking that it has turned out considerably weaker than Late Country in practice, I really want you to note that is pretty much entirely on Luke's back versus other decks like Aura using Data Vault, I think have shown a much, much stronger performance. Luke pulls the Data Vault in aggregate stats way down. If we exclude him from the stats, as I do mention in the final law kind of retrospective article, the Data Vault stats wind up looking much, much higher. So there you go. We've dug into things. Hopefully this was a little more interesting for folks to take a look at. You can click around, of course, yourself, turn all sorts of things off and on, slice this data any way you want. Any of these that you're a little uncertain what they mean, I've added, there's either explainers here with the little question mark icon you can hover over, or there's text right under the title trying to explain what to do with it. So if you were listening in audio, I do apologize, especially the tail end of this wound up getting a little more visual needed heavy than I expected. If you've been following along, otherwise, thank you. So there you have it, folks. That's the SWU report. That's the APR Meta Dashboard. And thanks for listening. There you have it, folks. May the force be with you.